Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, December 19th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to have a spoiler discussion for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and we're going to share our interviews with the directors and producers of the film. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
And Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
Okay, I think we've talked about this movie at great length on the water cooler, past episodes of the Water Cooler, and the Slash Filmcast has a great in-depth review. So I don't think we need to review this film, but I think it's very clear that all three of us love this movie. So before we actually get to spoilers, I wanted to ask you guys, because I really think this movie should get some recognition outside of the best animated feature category of like all these, awards coming up, like the Academy Awards. But do you think it does deserve more than that? And do you think it will? Do you think there's any chance that the Academy or any I know the Utah Critics Association actually named this film Best Picture of the Year. Do you think we'll see any more of that? Let's start with you, Brad.
I feel like it might be a little late in the game for the movie to get any Oscar buzz as far as the general Best Picture category is concerned. It's one of those movies where I don't think that they were really making a big push to get in that category, and since there's so much politics and campaigning in the Oscars, I feel like that's going to be difficult for the movie to do. I do feel like that they have a very good chance at getting the best animated feature Oscar over Incredibles 2, which was already the favorite to win. But I would love to see it get more awards accolades. I feel like it's unlikely that it'll get the kind of high honor that it got from the Utah Film Critics Circle. But this is a movie that really does deserve that level of praise. It sounds weird, but you have to think about what this movie accomplishes. It makes a genre that is very oversaturated feel really refreshing again. It does so with a story that has an interesting array of diverse characters. It has an incredible message about being a hero and what it means, but also tying that to real world society and culture and struggles and problems. And the animation itself is something that is groundbreaking and innovative. They had to invent new technology to do some of the things that they wanted to do with this animation. So it literally is innovative what they did with this movie. On top of that, the storytelling itself is something that's original and unique. It's an approach to a superhero story and a comic book story that we haven't seen in this form before. Most animated superhero fare has been relegated to DVD shelves, and the quality that's on display here, is something that is truly, awe-inspiring and visually stunning. So I feel like counting it out isn't something that people should be doing, but I think thinking that it has a chance of getting a Best Picture nomination is probably shooting for the moon.
Yeah. One of the other things is the Oscar in the past, or the Academy in the past, has kind of gotten things wrong. Like, there's some people that think that this won't even win Best Picture. Ben, what do you think?
Like Best Animated, really?
Yeah, Best Animated, sorry.
Yeah, that's the thing is I hope it does with all of my heart, because I honestly feel like it's the best animated movie that I've seen this year. And, looking back at the Academy's history, only three animated films have ever been nominated for Best Picture. And that's Beauty and the Beast in 1991, Up in 2009, and Toy Story 3 in 2010. And I'm not sure that this movie came out early enough to be able to hit a wide enough number of potential Oscar voters to get the recognition that it deserves. I would love to see Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse get a Best Original Screenplay, or I don't know if it would be original, but adapted screenplay, maybe a nomination in that category, because that would be amazing. I feel like in addition to all the stuff that Brad said, which I obviously 100% agree with, I think the script is it does so much heavy lifting in terms of exposition and character building and world building and all of this stuff in such a breezy, fun way that and it's so accessible too. It's dealing with parallel dimensions and some pretty heavy sci-fi concepts, but it does so in such a really fun, easy to understand way. And that's it makes it look easy, and that kind of stuff is really, really not easy to get across in a screenplay in a way like that this movie did. So I would love to see it get all sorts of nominations, but I'm not sure. And you know, obviously the Oscar voting body has traditionally been viewed as like this group of old white guys, basically. And I know that, you know, in recent years that's been changing a little bit, but we're still not 100% sure of what exactly that voting body looks like. There's a lot of mystery there. We don't know if people are actually going to get around to watching this movie or not. So I don't know. There's still a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you both said is exactly correct. The Critics Association that I'm a part of, the Los Angeles Online Film Critics Circle, is I tried to get them. I pushed to get this considered for Best Picture, but even that group we voted the first week of December, and there had been some press screenings of this film before our voting, but like not everybody could see it. And I imagine the Academy, which is made up of, you know, people in the industry that are actually working every day on film sets and, do you know what I mean, on their own movies. Like this film has been out, you know, a mere weeks before they you know, vote and stuff. I don't know. I also think that they, like, unless a film is a Pixar film nowadays, I feel like, you know, it's not quote unquote serious enough of a story for them to consider for Best Picture, which is sad, because I feel like, and I know Brad Bird says this all the time, but animation isn't a genre. Animation isn't for kids. It's a medium, and this film, I really think, you know, I know I've only seen 60 films this year, which is a lot less than I normally say, but of those 60 films, this is by far the best film I've seen. I look at my list of the films I've seen, and this is the only film in my top 10 that I could see myself rewatching on a yearly basis 10 years from now. And I'm not saying that makes a film the best film, but you know, there are some good films. Just, you know, I really liked Roma, but I'm not sure I'm ever going to revisit that again. So, I mean, it's kind of like that. But
and in terms of the Pixar thing, too, Lord and Miller, who are responsible, or at least largely responsible for this movie, they have some familiarity with that concept, too, because the Lego movie was basically shut out of Oscar nominations a few years ago when that came out. And it might be a similar thing here.
Yeah. Well, anyways, we should get to actual spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie, we're going to start talking about plot points and stuff. We highly recommend you go see this movie. So I know some people, I hear from listeners that when we have these spoilers episodes, that they actually listen to them without seeing the movie. And that, like, breaks my heart, even though I don't care about spoilers. But please go see this movie. And if you haven't seen it, turn it off. And we'll talk about some stuff. Actually, quickly before spoilers, Brad, you're the only one here who saw this film in 3D, and I saw either Lord or Miller on Twitter basically hyping up the 3D experience, something that they usually aren't excited about. So how is the experience of this movie in 3D? Because this movie is so visceral and so insane. I can't even imagine what it's going to be like in 3D. I might actually go see it a fourth time in 3D if you say it's worth it.
Yeah, it's very cool to see in 3D. It's not, you know, I wouldn't say that it's a mind-blowing experience or anything like that, but it does add a lot of depth and richness to the visuals that you see on screen, simply because of the animation style itself, and the way, you know, it presents the setting, and just the way the camera moves, you know, through scenes and things like that too. The 3D definitely heightens it. It adds to it and really makes the animation pop a lot more than most 3D movies would nowadays. So, I mean, any animated movie is usually good to see in 3D, but this one in particular, it's really something cool to see on the big screen.
It is weird. I feel like years ago, I would tell people that. I would say, like, you know, if it's a CG animated movie, go see it in 3D. And I feel like that's not that isn't 100% nowadays. I feel like even DreamWorks was doing it pretty heavily. They were doing, big into the 3D game, and I feel like the filmmakers are less like excited about 3D. So the 3D renders, even though it's rendered from an actual 3D, virtual product in the computer, I'm not that impressed with the 3D animated films these days. But so how would you compare it to the typical 3D animated films these days? Like, is it on that bar or a little bit better?
Well, kind of like I said, I think what makes this a little bit more unique is simply how it's shot and the animation style itself, because especially with the way they use depth of field and how they mess with like what you're meant to focus on as far as like, making the background look a little bit blurry, not just in a way where like it looks like a camera's out of focus, but in a way that it looks like you're looking at a 3D image without 3D glasses sometimes. And so it's a different approach. And so it's not just as simple as seeing a 3D modeled animated environment in 3D. It's seeing this particular style of animation in 3D just adds this layer of richness to the images.
That final action scene in this movie is so insane. I can't even imagine. This is one of the few animated movies that I can't imagine, like, if they had the budget to make a live action version of this, what that live action version would even look like. Like, I don't even think it's possible. That
sequence in particular is pretty cool in 3D, especially, I won't get into necessarily why, but the way the environment and things move around in that scene is particularly cool in 3D.
Well, we can talk spoilers now, but I do want to rush this along because we do have a lot of interview to play to you guys, and let's talk about the ending scene. Or actually, before the credits, the actual ending scene while Miles Morales is in bed, singing to himself, and it seems like a portal opens up in his ceiling, and Spider-Gwen or Spider-Woman kind of appears to him, or we hear her voice. I've seen this movie 3 times, and I'm still not clear if this is this him, because he's in bed, and he's kind of like, he could be taking a nap. Is that him daydreaming of talking to Gwen, or is that actually her coming back through the interdimensional portals?
So sorry. Go ahead.
No, you got it.
I was just gonna say I listened to a spoiler interview podcast with Lord and Miller. We have our own coming up here in just a few minutes, but they did a different one with the Empire podcast, and they mentioned on that that particular scene is meant to take place a little bit forward in time. They didn't establish exactly when, but it's not like that same day Miles comes home and this happens. It's meant because it takes place right after a montage at the very end of the movie. They were able to position it in a way where they gave themselves some wiggle room as far as the timeline, but that is something that actually does happen, and it's not a daydream or anything like that. And it does happen a little bit into Miles's
career
tenure as Spider-Man. Yeah, exactly.
So maybe this could be part of the inciting incident of the Spider-Gwen or Spider-Woman. Do we know what they're calling it?
I don't think they've actually given it a full name, right, Brad?
The sequel you're talking about?
No, well, they have a Spider-Woman spin-off of some sorts, right?
Oh, yeah. I don't think it has a name or anything. They just said that what the sequels will the characters that they'll involve.
Yeah, I'm wondering if she's going to have to get him to come to her dimension to help her out with stuff, and that kind of actually bothers me because after seeing this film, I kind of want to see solo films of these characters and not have crossovers in those films. And then maybe, like, in the third film, have them get back together in interesting ways. Like, I want to know what you guys think. Like, should, like, this Spider-Woman spin-off film, should it have Miles in it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like, I think that's what's cool about this is the interconnectedness of these characters and how you can use them together. And I don't think that you have to have a movie solely focus on just one of the characters without having another one come in. Simply because you look at this story is definitely Miles Morales' story and like his origin story of how he becomes Spider-Man. But having those other characters in it doesn't take away from that at all. If anything, it's that's the key to what helps him become what he's supposed to be. And I think that having Spider-Gwen and Miles be in a movie together for the next part would really be a good idea.
I was going to say, I thought maybe this could be used as like the opening scene of the official sequel to Into the Spider-Verse, and maybe the spin-offs could take place sort of off in their own dimensions, and maybe like based on, and maybe this is a good way to transition into the post-credit scene, maybe what happens there could have some effect on the multiverse as a whole. So maybe it gets locked up, for example, and like the barriers are closed and they can't go get help from their spider friends, and they have to take care of their problems themselves, and then maybe it opens back up, and then the sequel takes place when they're able to sort of traverse dimensions again.
It kind of annoys me that these like wormholes are still open. Like, I feel like they should be closed with the. I
don't think the way that Gwen comes back is because wormholes are still open. If anything, especially since Lord and Miller said time has passed since then,
yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if Gwen figured out just how to reopen them, because she's obviously smart in the same way that Peter Parker is, and so I think she probably figured out a way to just reopen it instead.
I do think it'll be interesting when Miles Morales probably will meet up with Gwen, right? In his timeline, because she exists in there, or she's going to probably move there or whatever. No, actually, she exists somewhere in New York, right? It'll be interesting for him to have different relationships with the same woman from different alternate dimension realities. Mm-hmm. I think it could be cool. Okay, let's talk about the credit scene that you mentioned. I think in my screening, a lot of people, like half the crowd, kind of, when it revealed who that was, got it, and the other half was kind of not understanding. It was kind of like the reaction that the original credit scene for Avengers, where Thanos first appeared, got, where fans loved it, and the other half the crowd was like, "What is going on here?" So, Brad, you wrote a whole article explaining what was going on there.
Yeah, so this character is actually Woody Harrelson as Carnage,
with a horrible wig.
No, so so as the credit scene plays out, the giveaway for most of the hardcore Star Wars fans, Spider-Man fans, is that it says "Meanwhile in Nueva York," which is specifically the setting for Spider-Man 2099, which is another iteration of Spider-Man that exists in the year 2099 in the future.
This is kind of like the Batman Beyond of Spider-Man comics.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it takes place in the future, and there is a different Spider-Man named Miguel O'Hara, and he has a completely different origin than Peter Parker does. It does share some similarities, but instead of there being an Oscorp that is working on experiments, it's a company called the Alchemax Corporation, which is interesting because that's the company that is already at the center of the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse story anyway. They're the ones that are working on the particle collider that Kingpin is trying to use to merge dimensions. So his origin, it basically is that Miguel discovers that the company has been killing people in experiments, and so he's trying to expose it, but then he gets found out. He gets tricked into taking a highly addictive drug so that he won't leave the company. He tries to cure himself by rewriting his own genetic code, but he ends up getting sabotaged by a coworker, and it results in him receiving spider DNA, about 50% spider DNA, and he becomes the future's version of Spider-Man. And he has a little bit of a different suit, as you can see in the movie. It's blue with a lot more prominent red, a spider symbol that kind of looks like it has a skull in the middle of it. His face mask looks a little bit more like a luchador mask. So it's an interesting Spider-Man story. Spider-Man 2099 is a cool character, and he's voiced by Oscar Isaac in that credit scene. So this is clearly something that they would likely want to do something with in the future as far as the character is concerned. And the character himself does provide sort of an interesting way to continue the narrative into the Spider-Verse and keep the idea of parallel dimensions and crossover dimensions alive, because he also has a device that's kind of like this watch that allows him to hop into other dimensions. And that's what he uses in the scene when he goes back to the 1967 animated Spider-Man, where they do the Spider-Man meme where it's double Spider-Man pointing at each other.
I love that ending and hate it at the same time, because I almost wanted it to be kind of this like serious cliffhanger of sorts, but it's hilarious. That meme. Where does that meme come from? You know the origin?
Well, the Spider-Man series itself, it's a real animated series that existed in 1967, and I don't know necessarily like when the first time it was used, but it's constantly been used to when people are trying to say that you're the pot calling the kettle black. So that's how it's used online, and it's been popping up a lot. But there are other memes referencing the animated Spider-Man as well, but that's probably the most famous one.
Yeah, the one with him behind the desk. It's used in the credits and in the movie.
Yeah.
Let's talk about like really briefly about Easter eggs here. Obviously, there's Stan Lee cameo. There's actually Stan Lee cameos. I guess he's the filmmakers just said that he's placed in the background of a lot of the crowd scenes. This third time when I was watching the film, I tried to look and I did not find any Stan Lee other than the prominent Stan Lee cameo. But Ben, what did you think of the Stan Lee cameo?
That was really great, man. And especially, it sort of, they made this movie before he died, but it felt like a nice tribute to him anyway. It just sort of like cosmically aligned that way, where it feels like the perfect Stan Lee send-off. And I know he's going to appear in other like live action Marvel movies and stuff, but just in terms of like for audiences who are still maybe reeling from his death, going into this movie and seeing the way that this film treats him as a character and how that cameo performance is really like the thing that that sort of puts a voice to the ideas that Lee was working on in the comics in the first place, instead of just like a one-liner gag or some joke where he's supposed to be Hugh Hefner or whatever. Yeah. It is really touching, and it works really well. In terms of Easter eggs, I didn't really spot too many. I know Brad has a couple in his back pocket that he can talk about, but one that I know that I read about somewhere was you were talking about Stan Lee appearing elsewhere in the movie, and there's a scene where Miles and Peter are being dragged behind an elevated train, and they land in a crosswalk, and somebody steps over them in the street, and apparently the character that steps over them is Stan Lee as well. So maybe keep an eye out for that if you get a chance to go see the movie again.
Oh wow. My last viewing of the film, I saw a bunch of things in the background. In New York City, I saw a restaurant that had the name Rami on it. I saw a building that had the name Bendis, in terms of Brian Michael Bendis, the co-creator of this character, and obviously Sam Raimi, the guy that directed the good Spider-Man movies before this.
And also there's some numbers where when people are scrolling through their cell phones, you can probably see. I'm guessing people have probably already noticed those, but like, B. Bendis, or I think Sarah Pichelli is one of the other creators who was on that comic run, and you can see their names and initials or whatever in people's phones when they're scrolling through.
There's also, I think there was a restaurant I saw too called Ramita's or something like that, referencing both John Romita Jr. and Sr., who have worked on Spider-Man as well.
Oh, cool. And there's also like all the like in this alternate reality, because Miles Morales doesn't exist in our timeline, right, or our dimension. He exists in a different dimension. There's like all these weird movies pictured in the background. Like there's one with like Seth Rogen. I know you were talking about some earlier, Brad.
Yeah, they're either like some of them are alternate versions of movies that we know. I forget what the title was, but there's an alternate version of Bridesmaids that you can see advertised in the Times Square bulletin boards. There's actually several you can see when you're down in Times Square.
There's a Red Man group. I remember seeing that.
Yeah, there's Red Man group. There's Edgar Wright pointed this out on Instagram. There's actually a Shaun of the Dead, an alternate Shaun of the Dead poster in the background. That it seems like it would actually be a sequel, because it shows Nick Frost's character, already in zombie mode. So it might be that Shaun of the Dead actually exists in Miles Morales' universe, but there's also a sequel that exists in that universe, which makes me jealous of the universe that Miles Morales lives in. And then one of the other billboards there, which is kind of a cool reference to one of the cast members. As we know, John Mulaney voices Spider-Ham in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. There's a billboard. It's pretty close to actually where the Shaun of the Dead one is, which says "From Dusk Till Dawn." It says "Hi, Hello," and it's a Broadway show. And that is in itself is a parody of John Mulaney and Nick Kroll's "Oh Hello" Netflix special, which features two characters that originated on the Kroll show. So that was a fun little reference that they put in there just for fun.
Very cool. I think that probably... Actually, you know what? I do want to talk briefly about... when I saw this movie, I was like, I want to see spin-off movies of all these characters. And when I said that, I really wasn't talking about Spider-Ham. But it seems like the internet wants a Spider-Ham movie. And even John Mulaney has an idea for the sequel. Ben, I think you wrote about this on the site.
I did, yeah. He says that in comics, he never thought that the Clark Kents and the Peter Parkers leaned enough into their day jobs. So he has a sort of a pitch for a Spider-Ham solo movie. He says Spider-Ham is a fun guy who is capable of great rage. To go see him back at the Daily Beagle, I could see a Watergate-like story at the Beagle where he's both a reporter and Spider-Ham by night. This would be more like The Post or All the President's Men or Spotlight, but we'd make it family-friendly. Lots of bacon jokes or that's ham-fisted. So that's his pitch. I have no idea whether Sony is going to use that pitch or not. It sounds like he's just sort of spitballing there. But yeah, I don't know, Peter. I'm sort of right there with you. I feel like Spider-Ham in particular is a character who, as we saw in this movie, worked really, really well in small doses, and I'm not sure if giving him a full movie is the right move, at least at this point in this nascent animated Spider-Man universe. But
hey, if it happens, we'll get a hand-drawn animated film on the big screen again.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And Amy Pascal and Avi Arad, who are producers, have both said recently in a big Vanity Fair article that they were interested because they said, of course, you can imagine how much the kids love that character. And Avi Arad said, yeah, we want Piggy. That's an exact quote from him, by the way. But so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is going to happen anytime soon, if they're going to use Mulaney's pitch, if he's going to be a writer on this. I mean, obviously he's like an acclaimed writer himself. He wrote for Saturday Night Live for many years. But yeah, I don't know.
Brad, I know you're the comedy nerd on this podcast. Are you even interested in a Spider-Ham movie?
I mean, on some level, yeah. I do think that he's probably a better character who just pops in and out and appears and has a smaller role. But there's also a part of me that just loves the idea of an entire movie following this, cartoonish version of Spider-Ham, especially because, we don't really get, like Looney Tunes-esque things anymore. And Spider-Ham himself is very much a Looney Tunes tribute. And I feel like we could get a movie that's maybe something akin to like a Space Jam or a Looney Tunes back in action, not necessarily with the live action elements, but just having that Looney Tunes kind of humor back on the big screen again would be something that's cool. I think it's something that we don't get often anymore, and it's a good way to revive and also pay tribute to Looney Tunes. So especially since there's the fan demand for it, I say see what they can do. If they can come up with a good script, why not give it a shot? And as somebody who loves John Mulaney, I can always do with more things from him.
See, I'm now picturing Spider-Ham in the live-action real world, and maybe that working like Roger Rabbit.
That would be cool too. I would love to see that.
Okay, we've spent enough time talking about this movie. Is there anything you guys want to say that hasn't been said about this film? See
it. Drag as many people as you can to see it. Drag your family to see it.
I think people have already seen it if they're at this part where we've
Don't
spoiled.
care. Drag people to see it again. Drag new people to see it. Just get as many people to see it as possible. This movie should be huge. It should be getting so much more attention. Like, it was at the top of the box office, but it made $35 million in its opening weekend. That's not nearly as big as it should be for a movie like this. It should be huge. It should be big.
This should be making Venom numbers.
Yeah, I would just say if you have any Oscar voters in your life, make sure they sit down and watch this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've said it all. So Ben, we're going to play your interviews here with the filmmakers. Which one should we play first, and can you set it up?
Sure. I think we should start with the directors first. So last month, I sat down with Bob Perschetti, who directed The Little Prince, Peter Ramsey, who's directed Rise of the Guardians, and Rodney Rothman, who's the writer of 22 Jump Street. And all three of them co-directed this movie. And I talked to him about the technical reasons why this movie looks so incredible, their sort of unique collaboration, because a lot of times animation movies are not directed by three people, so it's sort of a rarity, and a bunch of other stuff. So here's that interview. So for me, and probably for a lot of our readers, we instantly know that this movie is unlike anything that we've seen before. But for me, I've sort of been struggling to accurately describe the animation style of this movie. So I'm just wondering, can you guys pinpoint what you did specifically to give this movie such a special visual look?
Hired this man.
No, weirdly enough, we kind of struggle too, trying to like simplify it. But it's at its core, it's like we took the idea of traditional animation, hand-drawn animation, and sort of the rules of that, and then took CGI animation and blended them together. I mean, that's like the super simple version of it. And a little deeper in the weeds is that, we had these characters modeled based off of drawings. And then once we did that, we realized some of the really expressive part of the designs was actually the line work. And then we went in and figured out a way to draw line work on top of these characters three-dimensionally. And then that line work could accept light if it needed to or not. And then the final thing that makes it really feel a lot different is that in CG, there's 24 frames in a second of film. And in all CGI right now, there's a new image for every frame of movement. And in traditional animation, hand-drawn animation, you only needed 12 drawings to fill it up because your eye can't catch that little, that you can hold a drawing for 2 frames. If you hold it for 3, your eye can kind of catch the fact that it's being held.
Right.
And so we stripped out everything and we animated this on 2s, and they had to write a bunch of new algorithms and things to try and make up for sort of the lost simulations and all that stuff, like hair and cloth and things like that. But it really just makes it feel crunchy and crispy and poppier, and you get really strong posing. And then the final little reason why it's so crisp is that there's not one frame of motion blur anywhere in the movie, and that's in every movie now. Even live action with CG VFX, they put motion blur on it just because it just helps soften it. And we were just looking for something that felt a little more punchy.
Yes, that approach basically makes the compositions stronger, or that's at least the goal. Another way we talk about it is that it's basically combining CG animation, 2D, hand-drawn animation, comic book art, and street art. Sort of into something that we're trying to combine into something that feels unified, basically.
For sure. So the pacing of this movie is really incredible. I feel like it really flies, but you also get a really good sense of Miles's family life along with all of the great action stuff. Can you guys talk about striking that balance?
Yeah, that was job one, even beyond finding a unique look. It was the look's not going to mean anything unless you're following the experience of the main character in a way that's going to carry you through the movie and keep you engaged from his particular point of view. I mean, especially when you're talking about, you've got multiple universes, you got multiple Spider-Men. The real job was how do we keep it Miles' story? Because for us, the charm of it and the heart of it was all about Miles, the triangle that he's in with his father and his uncle, and the idea that his family experience really is kind of what makes him unique and different than Peter Parker or the other iterations of Spider-Man we've seen. So how do we build out from there and keep everything that happens in his experience?
Earlier this year, I was at a Q&A where Phil Lord described you guys, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but he basically called you guys the action guy, the comedy guy, and the poet. Did you each approach this project from that sort of angle? What was the collaboration like between you guys working on this movie?
that's a tough one. Go on.
No, I know. I mean, I was just gonna say the thing that was interesting is just that there's this movie it was 3 directors. This movie needed all 3 of us, and this movie wouldn't exist in its form without all 3 of us. Yeah. So it was
It's true.
A special circumstance where each one of us, we all have different skills. Some skills overlap, some don't. But really, like, we had a creative collaboration that really just gelled, and it was, and we had no time really to make it not work, because we had to finish the movie, and it was and we were always sort of on the same page, and if there were any creative differences, we would work them out in editorial, and I think we're really complementary to each other.
Yeah, it's kind of like an exchange of skills along the way. There is overlap, though, but it's like, on the one hand, I definitely brought more experience, let's say, with comedy, into the collaboration, but it's not like I could, like, point to stuff and say to people, oh, this is funny, don't worry about it. It's like, we know if something's funny or not.
Right.
And I had something to offer, visually, but sometimes I certainly didn't have the same vocabulary to express it that these guys did, and I certainly didn't have the same experience. So a lot of times I would have to talk about what, I thought it should feel like or look like, and then look at Bob or Peter and be like, now, how would I say that in a way that, like, a genius animator can go off and, anyway, so, but so I learned a lot, personally, I learned a lot in the process, but I think all of us would say that in the end, there was a real overlap in what we were doing, and that's the only way it could work.
I was going to say, the overlap between what we do is what made it work, because that brings in sensibility, it brings in taste, it brings in, because,
tone, style, everything.
I mean, they like to think of me as the action guy, because I've worked on a lot of action stuff, back in my live action days, but some of the greatest action in this movie, Bob conceived, I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And, poetry, Rodney brought tons and tons of that to his scenes. I don't know what I did, but but we all, like, I look at the movie, and it's like I can really see all of our fingerprints on the
throughout. Like, I think historically, like, for animated films, often there's many, there are oftentimes directing teams, and oftentimes literally they break apart the film into sequences, and one director has these and another director has these, and it definitely wasn't that for us. Yeah,
it wasn't that.
Was there one scene that changed the most, excuse me, from conception to the final execution for you guys? A white whale or something that you guys
were
really...
Was there one scene that didn't? Yeah. It's really the question.
I'm trying to think what would be, like, the emblematic scene.
Yeah.
I mean, just to talk about it, I would throw out... basically any sequence in the movie could qualify for what you're talking about, because
it's true.
Because things change and iterate repeatedly for years, as you, like, kind of boil things down to whatever the essence of what you're trying to do is. One thing that does pop to mind is there's a scene where Peter and Miles, right after they first meet, where they're walking up and down buildings while they talk. That's an example of something that changed, because you had a scene that was basically what we would call, like, a pipe scene. Like, it's a scene that has to communicate expository plot, and as it evolved, we started to try to think about, well, how can we, if we have to take our medicine with this scene, and we just have to, how can we do that in a way that is very specific to us, that only we can do? And in that case, what eventually evolved was a scene where they're having an expository conversation, but they're doing it while they're, walking up and down buildings, which Peter is very good at and Miles is not, which for us communicates story and character.
Sure.
And then even after that, even after that concept came into being, the scene continued to evolve as far as how we were shooting it, and
even the content of it. It was really interesting for us over the preview process to just start to figure out what would stick, what people would remember, boil things down to their essence, and that scene just kept getting tighter and tighter.
Right.
You know, fewer and fewer words.
Right. But every scene in the movie,
There's
a lot of we threw a lot of things out of the car as we drove. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think the scene that changed the least was probably the cemetery scene.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's like if you want the counter to that, that's the one that was the first scene animated, and more or less a couple lines shifted here and there, but more or less that was.
But in a way, you could say it changed the most because that was the first sequence where we really got all of our visual tools and storytelling tools sort of figured out. That first sequence became like the workshop, and then after that, we were like, oh.
We can actually make this movie.
We know how to do this now.
Was there a lot of trial and error in finding the look of the movie?
That took the first, year and a half?
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, because there was everybody okay, we want to make this like something you've never seen before. It's introducing a new Spider-Man after we've seen a lot of iterations of the character. Mm-hmm. We want to do something that, since this is an animated movie, let's truly lean into what animation can give us visually in terms of being able to evoke the look and feel of a comic book. Mm-hmm. How do we do that? How different can we make it? And Bob started having ideas. Oh, we can do it on twos, and we can, how to approach the animation. And then visually the challenge was, how do we create a style that will support emotionality and character, but still be something really different and something that technically takes from the world of the graphic style of comic books. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you should talk about just like the technical.
I mean, even just tell me what I should talk about but I was going to go to the idea of just we really visually this movie's obviously incredibly stylized. It has a real strong language behind it. The thing that we were always searching for, though, in our performances was like a naturalism. Yeah. So it was finding the balance of like, how do we get a character to be as stylized as we've chosen to try and make these characters, but also in their animation and we had great vocal performances from our whole cast, and like, how do we get their acting performances to feel as naturalistic as the vocal performances? Mm-hmm.
And were you guys locked in with a release date when you came on to the movie? So do you think that I guess in different circumstances, let's say in a perfect world where you didn't have that release date to hit, do you think the movie would look more advanced or something? I mean, I love the movie the way it looks right now, but I'm just wondering.
I don't know that it would look different. Yeah. It would probably have been a little bit easier to get to the final. Like in the end, we would have found a cleaner procedure for the process, because even still to the very end, since this was the first time ImageWorks has ever done anything like this, right, and anyone really has, we were learning along the way, all the way until like last week.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, the movie's a kind of funny combination of stuff that's hyper considered, and that hundreds of the talented people spend a long time trying to figure out how to do, and then I wouldn't go as far as I want to say almost like Jackson Pollock style, just like just like in the moment, again, people who really know what they're doing, just kind of like throwing some stuff down. Mm-hmm. Some parts of the movie are created more from that spirit.
Yeah, and this, I feel like it has to be, for me and probably for a lot of people, is going to be like the best Spider-Man story that has been told on film so far, and that's like a pretty high bar to live up to.
High bar.
Are you guys? I'm sure you've seen the reactions probably at this point.
Yeah.
How are you feeling in this? Are you in sort of a glow at this point?
It's more than a glow, man. It's like surreal. Because literally, just a few days ago, I'm just like. A day ago.
Mixed stage.
What day is today?
Today's Thursday.
Yeah,
Sunday.
I mean,
so Sunday. Yeah.
I was on the mixed stage Sunday till like 1 a.m.
Wow.
Like, to me, it's like, wait a minute, we finished? I still haven't even had that. It's like the baby is like graduating from college, and it's just crazy. It's really crazy.
So I think I have 2 questions left. One, have you guys played the Spider-Man video game that came out this year, the PlayStation one? I'm sure. Have you had any time to do anything like that, like messing around between takes?
And if we did have time off, I don't think Spider-Man would be.
Fair enough. I was just curious. That's another really great.
And the funny thing is, like, on our whole sort of tour, like in Europe, everybody's so excited about that, and we're like, I don't know. You know,
You'll get to it in 5 years or something.
It's supposed to be great. You know?
Yeah, it's awesome. Fantastic.
And then finally, I just wonder if each of you could just talk about your relationship with Spider-Man and why this story felt like it was a thing that you wanted to be a part of at this point.
Sure, man. I mean, I think I was saying this, I think the other day, it's just like, I can't even remember when he, you know, the idea of Spider-Man, where I first was introduced to it. In my childhood, it was afternoon reruns, you know, the obviously like the 67 cartoon and all of that. You know, but for me, when I first started on this movie, I had to do like the first day I had to do a presentation to the studio. And I literally, it was like, I had got hired, first day was like a Thursday, it was like, oh, tomorrow you're gonna get up in front of the studio and just talk about Spider-Man. And I was like, dude, I just started. And so it was really, I had a little clip where I was in Brooklyn one year with my godson, who at the time was 4, and we were eating at the diner under that bridge right there. And my friend said, hey, man, I got like a Spider-Man costume, and Finn thinks that Spider-Man's here somewhere, like, you want to put it on? And I was like, yeah, I do. And I put it on, and I went around, I hid down the street, and I came running by, and I found him, and I was asking him, you know, to help me defeat Doc Ock, and he filmed the whole thing. Like, for me, that was the impetus of this, was like the look in his eyes, because he was really seeing like a real superhero. It was just like, oh, that's, if we can get that from like a $15 costume, then what could we do with a big expensive Hollywood movie?
Yeah.
You know?
Wow. I've been a comics, as a kid I was a huge Marvel Comics fan. Grew up seeing the Spider-Man, the old 60s Spider-Man cartoons when I was tiny. And I think the first comic book I ever bought with my own money was an issue of Spider-Man. I think it was Spider-Man versus the Molten Man.
Nice.
I wrote my name in it on the first page in little cursive letters, and I've always loved the character. He's always been, you know, he's funny, and he's got tons of problems, and he's like the Charlie Brown of superheroes. You know, your heart just goes out to him. And then, you know, by the time this project came around, you know, I'm, of course, totally jaded about any Spider-Man or whatever superhero movies, but the fact that Phil and Chris were involved, and then I heard Bob was involved, and we know each other from DreamWorks, and I know how brilliant this dude is, and it was like, oh my God, this is going to be incredible. Then I heard it was the Miles Morales story, and of course, the opportunity to be able to like introduce that character to the world, and to like, for kids of color to be able to see a kid like that going on an adventure like this, was just like, that possibility completely blew me away. And when I watch the movie, I see some of these sequences, and I go, God, if I could have seen this movie when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know, for me, like, I grew up when I was a little kid in Queens, in Forest Hills, you know, so like, which is where Peter Parker's from. So, you know, even when I watch like the Raimi movies, you know, I see Tobey Maguire walking by like the Baskin Robbins I went to when I was 4. You know, like he filmed it like in like around the corner from where I grew up. So I've always had like a personal, you know, I basically thought I was Peter Parker. But beyond that, you know, the one thing your question made me say beyond that, you know, made me think of is, you know, the additional thing that kind of got me really excited with this movie beyond even Spider-Man was when I just started to talk to the people involved. These guys, Justin Thompson, who's the production designer, obviously Phil and Chris.
Got to shout out Justin.
Yeah, and when I started to get a sense of what the spirit behind the movie was, as far as what it was trying to say, and also, you know, how kind of like just gonzo the spirit behind it was. I've been searching for an experience like that for a long time. So, you know, it's my big hope with this movie. You know, my big fingers crossed hope is that it does well enough that not just like more Spider-Verse movies can be made, but that, you know, it will, that, you know, more interesting animated, that it will sort of open up different possibilities in animation, and that more, you know, people can have the experience that I just had, basically.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, you guys. I really appreciate it, and congratulations again. The movie is amazing.
Thank you.
So that was my discussion with the directors, and that same day I actually had a chance to sit down with Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the guys who brought us the Lego Movie and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and they are both credited as producers on this movie. Lord is credited with the screenplay, but it turns out that Chris Miller actually helped out quite a bit in that regard too. I talked to them about that, which characters appeared in earlier drafts of this movie, how they decided which spider people were going to make it into the final cut, finding the right actors to voice the movie's characters, and much more. So here is our conversation with Phil Lord and Chris Miller.
I'm sorry to eat this burrito at the start of this.
You gotta do what you gotta
I will
do.
answer the first question
And then
while
fine.
Phil has his mouth full.
No
We'll
problem.
deduct this from your time.
I actually do. My first question is for you, but first of all, congratulations on this movie, guys. This is incredible.
Thank you so much,
I
man.
loved it so much. So my first question is, you guys typically write together. So Chris, the first question is, why do you hate Spider-Man?
That's so
I
true.
so do not hate Spider-Man. It was a situation where we were really busy with a lot of things, and it was a bit of a divide and conquer situation. But I was heavily involved
Chris was a big part of this.
in from the genesis of it and developing the story and contributing to the script as well. But we have a lot of things
going on.
Yeah, for sure. How did you guys decide which spider people were going to be in this movie? There are tons of options, and how did you narrow that down?
We just wanted to have them be as different from each other as we possibly could, and we did. We did include all characters that we loved already. Mm-hmm. So we loved Ham from growing up, and Spider-Gwen is like this. Was such a cool new addition to the Marvel Universe, and the book is so great. So that was obvious. Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the end of the day, it all started with Miles. The whole thing that got us excited about doing this movie in the first place was to tell a Miles Morales story. Mm-hmm. And then the idea of taking an older version of Peter Parker that you haven't seen before, like the kind that we grew up with that then now has aged as we have, mm-hmm. and having him have to be a mentor. That's the sort of the main spider dynamic in the movie.
This started as a Miles movie, and then we got a little carried away.
Pretty much. And then when we got to the rest of the third Greek chorus after Miles, Peter, and Gwen, it became about which characters would feel the most different and have the complete different animation styles, mm-hmm. and looks and points of view on the universe, so that we could have everybody feel as different as possible on the screen together, and then say something universal about what it means to be a hero.
That's great. Were there any other familiar characters that were in earlier drafts but maybe didn't make it into the final cut?
Yes.
Can you tell me who this was?
I'm trying to remember. There's been so many drafts of this film.
These were the ones that we were all gravitating towards, and at certain various times, we tried to bring in another one, but ultimately,
you know who really didn't make the cut? It's a pretty big regret of mine. Australian Spider-Man.
The Australian Spider-Man. There were a bunch of ones that we considered at a certain point, but this ended up being as much as this movie could hold, mm-hmm. and still be a Miles Morales.
But there was a point when, in this draft, where just spider people just kept showing up and just being there. Sorry guys, I'm late. And then Australian Spider-Man showed up at one point and was immediately killed.
Died. Yes. Awesome. Yes, thankfully that version was lost to time.
Yeah.
So how much of this movie's unique visual style did you envision in the early days of coming up with the story?
Our first call was to our production designer, Justin Thompson. It was do you think we could pull this off? Would you be down to be involved?
Is what ultimately ended up on screen close to what you guys had in your head, or I imagine
it's even more
weirder
than we thought was possible. Mm-hmm. I mean, the idea was sort of, you always see this amazing art of books that have all these very stylistic, impressionistic paintings that are so beautiful, mm-hmm. And then they go through a pipeline and become a CG movie that looks similar to other CG movies. And we're like, well, why can't we make it look like the actual concept art, but actually like the concept art. And drawing on all the many years of comics and the various different artist styles of comic books, try and make it look like you're walking into a living, breathing comic book. And to everyone's credit at Sony, they all were like, yeah, let's do it. And they would say, this is really hard, and it's not going to be easy, and I'm not even sure we can accomplish it, but let's try. Mm-hmm. And we weren't even sure, even a year ago, if we were going to be able to pull it off, because, there was so much new, groundbreaking technology that had to be made to make this movie, and just so much labor, because not only is it a CG movie, but it's also a handmade, hand-drawn, and hand-painted movie, so it ended up being 4 times the work of a regular movie. It took 4 times as long just to produce a frame as a regular CG movie. So
that's wild.
But I think it was worth it.
It didn't cost 4 times as much.
Right.
So we got a tremendous value.
We just made everybody's lives impossible for a few years.
That's fine. There's some family members who are upset at that.
I was at a Q&A with you guys earlier in the year where you talked about how Shameik was cast, but I was wondering if you could tell me about the casting process for everybody else, all the other supporting Spider people. And
I mean, the lucky thing about voice casting is you get to audition everybody without them knowing it.
You just take their voice and put it on an image of the character and see if it fits. I mean, with Jake, we've worked with Jake many times. We've done a bunch of movies and things together and TV together. So he was our first choice and only idea that we had for Peter.
It's a good thing he said yes.
Yeah. And with the other ones, it was sort of, we would huddle up with the directors, and people would spitball ideas, and it would be this type of thing where someone would say, well, what about John Mulaney? And we're like, yeah. And then you listen to his voice, and you're like, I mean, it's I can't believe that we thought it could be anything but this.
Right.
And someone said...
But that was a real outlier. He was outside the bell curve of the kinds of folks that we were listening to.
Right.
And we just felt like we don't want to do a stock choice, what would feel refreshing.
Mm-hmm. Same thing when someone said Nick Cage, and we were like, that's crazy, but I love it. And then it was one of those things where we all would look at each other and go, yeah, that's the one. And it was a really cool collaborative process on that.
So I also had a chance to talk to them about a bunch of spoilery stuff, and I'm not going to play that portion of the audio, but I just want to tease it here on the podcast and actually encourage all of you who are listening to go to the site and read it. I broke that out into a separate article, so you only have to read that one article if you want to. But I talked to them about the decision to make Doc Ock a woman. I talked to them about Oscar Isaac and Chris Pine showing up in voice cameos, and some more stuff too. So and that final post-credits scene and how that all came together. So I would highly encourage everybody to click that link. It's in the show notes along with a bunch of other stuff that we mentioned. And that's been our big episode.
Very cool. This has been a double-sized episode of Slash Film Daily. Brad, where can people find more of your work online?
On Twitter, at Ethan_Anderton, always writing on slashfilm.com, and also check out my podcast, Go Flix Yourself, available on iTunes and other podcasting platforms.
Ben, where can we find you?
You can find me writing at slashfilm.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Ben Pearson.
You can find me at slashfilm on all social media. You can find all the stories we mentioned on today's podcast on slashfilm.com and linked in the show notes. I will include links to Chris's review of the movie, your text interviews with these people, and a bunch of stories we've written over the past couple weeks over, alternate versions of this film that could have been, including Doctor Strange, an Australian Spider-Man, and that video I talked about earlier where which Brad posted that has a ton of the Easter eggs hidden in this film and much more. So you can find that in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is usually published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, but we might be taking a holiday break next week, so look out for that. Send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to peter@slashfilm.com. And please head over to our iTunes page, write us a 5-star review, say a few lines, spread the word, tell your friends. We'll see you tomorrow.